There are train wrecks, there are fiery train wrecks, there are even fiery train wrecks that hurtle over the side of a mountain and land in a pool of hungry alligators. And then there's the Virtual Boy, a system that was around for less than a year, a system so badly received that Nintendo nowadays almost never acknowledges its existence. The Virtual Boy was so bad it makes the Wii U sales look like the PlayStation 2. But like it or not, the Virtual Boy did help to make history. It was one of gaming's first attempts at virtual reality on a home console, and even though it flopped, its influence can still be seen today. Join us as we examine the story behind Nintendo's worst console ever. First, let's go back to the 90s, when the Virtual Boy was born. Virtual reality was a big deal around the turn of the 20th century. Movies like Tron in the 80s and The Lawnmower Man in the 90s made it seem like the immersive technology was right around the corner. Even mainstream media was running stories about how VR was the technology of the future. We all expected it to come anytime. And for the first time, normal consumers could experience virtual reality for themselves. Arcades and movie theaters started showing off giant VR-equipped games where you could strap on a giant headset and be transported into a 3D world. While the technology was primitive, the potential seemed limitless. VR machines were huge and promised immersive, three-dimensional experiences in an open-world setting. It was like the holodeck from Star Trek had come to life. Enter the Virtual Boy. According to the magazine Fast Company, the Virtual Boy began its life as a portable head-mounted computer that you could use to watch a red LED display of constantly changing lights. It was designed in the 80s by an engineer named Alan Becker, who wanted to create a portable computer that came with its own display. He developed a rough version of the device with the help of colleagues, including fellow engineer Greg Hunter. They called it the Private Eye. In 1990, Beckman and others mounted two Private Eyes together on a welding mask and used it to play a tank simulation game. Through the headset, the player had a first-person view from a tank window while they tried to shoot other vehicles. Beckman and his group had created a low-cost VR headset. That's what that was, and they decided to shop it around to toy companies. But that was harder than expected. Discussions with Hasbro and Mattel went nowhere. Sega told them no thank you. But in 1991, they eventually got their machine in front of the biggest video game maker of all, Nintendo. They showed off the tank game demo to Nintendo engineers, one of whom seemed super interested. It turned out that engineer was Gunpei Yokoi, who was head of Nintendo's internal research and development division. He also was the mastermind behind the Game Boy, and he loved the technology. At the time, Yokoi didn't know what to do next. He had been at Nintendo for decades, but he felt like home consoles had become a graphical arms race that were starting to cater to only hardcore fans. What would be the next new, awesome, crazy way to play video games? And then the Private Eye showed up, and Yokoi saw a technological breakthrough. Even though the device was limited to a red and black display, Yokoi saw the opportunity to immerse players in complete darkness. Finally, games would break free of the TV set. As he wrote in his autobiography, Yokoi said, "I have my doubts as to Nintendo's future if it continues pursuing video games in the same way as before. What should be done to once again engross Famicom and Super Famicom players? If the TV screen medium has reached the limits of its potential, isn't 3D the only option?" Because of Yokoi's reputation at Nintendo, company chairman Hiroshi Yamauchi gave his blessing, and Nintendo bought a worldwide exclusive license to the Private Eye display technology. But before Nintendo took its new technology to the market, it had a couple of questions to answer. The first question was, how would people wear it? Yokoi wanted it to look like a pair of goggles that would allow people to walk around while playing, but the heavy equipment combined with safety concerns led Nintendo to scrap that idea. What would become the Virtual Boy soon evolved into a bulky red viewer mounted to a stand that rested on a table. If you wanted to play the Virtual Boy, you would have to hunch over a table. There would be no moving around. And then there was another big challenge to address: the possible effects that the Virtual Boy would have on its users' eyesight. While doctors never concluded that it was harmful to fully developed adult eyes, there was a possible danger to younger users' eyes if the lenses weren't aligned just right. To its credit, Nintendo designed the Virtual Boy's lenses to where they wouldn't be harmful to kids. Still, Japanese law required Nintendo to be extremely conservative when it came to warning labels. As a result, the Virtual Boy included warnings about every possible side effect from staring at a screen. There was even a timer that would pause the game every 15 minutes and remind you to take a break. Sound familiar? They still kind of do that with 3DS sometimes. At this point, the Virtual Boy was a severely compromised version of what it was originally intended to be. It wasn't wearable and it wasn't in color, but Nintendo still wanted something out of Yokoi. That's because 1994 was poised to be a huge year for new consoles. The Sega Saturn was due out along with the Sony PlayStation, but Nintendo had nothing. Its own next-gen console, the Nintendo 64, wouldn't be out for another 2 years. Given that environment, Chairman Yamauchi encouraged the team behind the Virtual Boy to finish it as soon as possible, ideally before the launch of Nintendo 64, so that the company would have something new in the market. Meanwhile, other teams, including Shigeru Miyamoto, were heavily at work on the Nintendo 64, and Nintendo wanted to save its trademark IPs like Mario and Zelda for the Nintendo 64, not for the Virtual Boy. Therefore, Yokoi was told to de-emphasize Mario on the Virtual Boy, which meant that the console wouldn't launch with the Mario game. Instead, the Virtual Boy's first game would be Space Pinball, a stereoscopic representation of a pinball game. Nintendo first showed off the Virtual Boy on November 15, 1994 at a software exhibition in Japan. Initially, there had been some excitement about Nintendo's machine. They weren't the only ones with VR in mind. Sega had discussed developing a VR headset for the Genesis, and Atari floated the idea of a possible headset for the Jaguar. But Nintendo had the advantage of being the first to take a VR machine to market. But reporters grew lukewarm to the Virtual Boy after they got word of its red and black display, as well as its table stand as opposed to a pure headset. When Nintendo finally showed off the Virtual Boy in Japan, attendees could only play Space Pinball and a boxing game. The reaction was understandably tepid. Some liked the stereoscopic display, but nobody liked the fact that all its graphics were various shades of red, and the fact that it was expected to retail for $200 didn't win over any fans either. The Virtual Boy came to the US at the Winter CES show in Las Vegas in early 1995. Again, the reaction was lukewarm. One reviewer criticized the console as not being true 3D. Michael Lambert wrote in an early online video game fanzine that "My biggest beef is Nintendo trying to pass this off to the public as virtual reality. It's not." Still, Nintendo said that it expected to sell 3 million Virtual Boys during its first year. While it didn't seem like Nintendo expected the Virtual Boy to be its next big console, Yokoi envisioned the Virtual Boy as the beginning of a brand new product line for Nintendo: wearables. But just a few months before the Virtual Boy launched in Japan, it got some bad news. Lots of bad news. The Japanese press latched onto the system's multitude of warnings and wrote stories about how playing the Virtual Boy could be bad for your eyes. The system launched in Japan on July 21, 1995. By December, it had only sold 140,000 units, which was a huge failure considering the success of previous Nintendo consoles. Just 6 months after its release, Nintendo pulled the plug on the Virtual Boy in Japan. Response to the system was better in the US, at least at first. It released on August 21st for $180, and Nintendo decided to partner with the video chain Blockbuster to rent the systems to people, allowing them to try out the experience first. And it worked, at least at first. During its fall launch in 1995, the Virtual Boy even managed to outsell the Sega Saturn in the US. The US sales convinced Nintendo to keep the Virtual Boy around in the States a little longer, even after it pulled the plug in Japan. But the Virtual Boy's success was ultimately short-lived. Demand kept dropping, and during its E3 show in 1996, Nintendo didn't mention the Virtual Boy at all. In August of 1996, Nintendo finally pulled the plug once and for all. The system was relegated to the bargain bin of stores, sometimes selling for as low as $30. By the time the Virtual Boy was discontinued, it had only sold about 770,000 units, never even broke a million. Fast Company reported that Yokoi blamed the failure on various factors, from unfair press coverage to misunderstandings from gamers to the awkward form factor. Most of all, he blamed Nintendo in Japan for not doing enough to market the system there. But Japanese author Takefumi Makino, who wrote 2 biographies on Yokoi, said that what Yokoi really regretted was the fact that he hadn't managed to develop a new, completely different type of video game. To make up for the failure of the Virtual Boy, Yokoi developed the Game Boy Pocket, a smaller, lighter version of his original Game Boy. It was released in 1996 and became another hit for Nintendo. After the release of the Game Boy Pocket, Yokoi resigned from Nintendo after nearly 31 years with the company. It was a shocking move in a country where employees traditionally remained loyal to a company for life. Yokoi then founded a new company with another Nintendo colleague and went on to create a new handheld system in Japan, the Bandai WonderSwan. Tragically, Yokoi died in a car accident in 1997. And that's the history of the Virtual Boy, a console that represented a rare super failure for a company that was used to making hits. It was an early, all-red stab of virtual reality that consumers completely rejected. For years afterward, the Virtual Boy was held up by some as proof that virtual reality systems couldn't sell. But despite its failure in the marketplace, the technology behind the Virtual Boy proved to be very far ahead of its time. As Fast Company put it, it helped kickstart the concepts of wearable computing and augmented reality and captured the imagination of one of the world's foremost toy inventors. It also powered the first and only natively stereoscopic video game system, a remarkably forward-thinking accomplishment given that it's taken another 2 decades for Oculus Rift, Sony's Project Morpheus, and HTC's Vive to return to the idea. Whether or not virtual reality will finally capture gamers' imaginations this time around, the Virtual Boy will always be a part of its history, and even for a flop, that's not a bad accomplishment.